All right, and so our first panelist is Marake.
Hi, everyone. Also, I'm really sorry if my Wi-Fi cuts out. I've been having a lot of issues with Zoom recently. But my name is Marake Tadessa. I am a senior majoring in Cell Bio with a minor in psych. And I am a Woodrow Wilson Fellow. I applied my freshman year, so I didn't come in as a Woodrow Wilson Fellow. And do you want me to just talk about like how I got my research or?
I'm so sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button. But yeah, just feel free to introduce, talk about what type of research you do, and then we have the guided questions afterwards. But
Okay,
yeah.
cool. So when I was looking for research my freshman spring, I was generally interested in the cancer realm. And so I was really just Googling cancer research Hopkins lab and just scrolling through what popped up. And I saw a listing or just the link to the website of the PI I have now, which is under the Goldman Pancreatic Cancer Research Center. And so I'm under Dr. Goggins' lab, if anyone is familiar with him. And yeah, so I just emailed him and I was like, hi, I'm like interested in your lab. Is there any, way that I can meet you in person and kind of go over like my interests and like how I can fit into your lab? And he was really swift with his response. And so I was able to come in, talk to him. And yeah, and he just was like, yeah, if you want to come in, volunteer, you're more than welcome to do that. And so he was the first and only person I reached out to, which I was talking to my breakout room about this, but in retrospect, I probably should have looked for more people and just expanded my research a little bit just to make sure that my interests were lining up with the aims of the lab. But nonetheless, it's been a great 3 years in the lab. I started out just like processing blood for 1 million hours a day and looking at like the serum and plasma, and because the lab is partly clinical, and so I was going to like the endoscopy unit in the hospital a lot and grabbing blood and separating it all out because they used the serum and plasma samples to extract DNA from. And so I was doing a lot of that. Then I transitioned to a lot of DNA extraction. And then now I've been more specifically working on projects in terms of looking at like SNPs, which are single nucleotide polymorphisms. And the main aim of the lab is really just to create a genetic profile that kind of examines genetic risks to pancreatic cancer, and kind of creating a profile of different genes and different mutations that are more strongly associated with pancreatic cancer, especially for like controls that are like you have pancreatitis or you have like an IPMN or something like that that affects the pancreas. And so that's what I've been working on for the past couple of years. And in terms of COVID, I obviously could not be in the lab since my lab is a wet lab. However, I've been transitioning to working on a literature review. And the focus of my literature review is, since pancreatic cancer affects the Black community a little bit more aggressively, I've been kind of looking at how pancreatic cancer and just like enrolling in genetic studies in general kind of differs in terms of ethnicity, because unfortunately my lab does not do a great job of gathering participants that are not white males, and most of our study is looking at white males. And so they thought it would be, and I thought it would be, a good project to look at in terms of like how Black people have access to care and kind of seek out these studies. And yeah, and in terms of like the Woodrow Wilson Fellowship, for those who are unfamiliar, you can apply your freshman year, and I think the application opens like sometime January, February. And for people who are enrolling their freshman year, it's a $7,500 grant, and you basically use that money like mostly during the summer after your freshman year. No, two summers. Summer after your sophomore year and the summer after your junior year. And the expectation is that you use that money to do your research project. And so obviously that kind of did not work out this summer because the labs were closed, but you can still use it to pay for rent and things like that. And then at the end of your Hopkins experience, you have a Woodrow Wilson Senior Symposium where you present what you've been working on for the past couple of years. And so that will be coming up soon. Yeah, if anyone has any questions about that, I'm here.
All right, I'll move on to our next panelist, and then we'll keep questions at the end. But keep them in mind. Or feel free to send them in the chat to me if you want it to be not said out loud. But yeah, so our next panelist is Baruch.
Hi guys, my name is Baruch. I'm a junior neuroscience major, and I study gastroenterology. So it's kind of weird that a neuroscience major studies gastroenterology, but my research, I'm not really focused on what I'm doing more than how I do it. So I do something really cool. I work with something, a structure called an enteroid, which is a 3D cell model. And so I'm not gonna go into a whole bunch of like cell bio babble here because that's not really what y'all came here for. But if you guys do end up doing wet lab and work with cells, you'll notice that there's a lot of limitations you have when you work with 2D cell cultures, right? There's only so much of the body you could mimic on a petri dish. So when you work with something like this, a 3D cell culture, you could actually mimic the cellular environment for these cells, and then you could study pathology. And so that's what I do. I handle these intestinal organoids and colonoids. These are just structures that have a whole bunch of stem cells in them that get regenerated, and they secrete a whole bunch of chemicals. And so I use them to study how goblet cells go wrong when you develop ulcerative colitis. So that's an autoimmune disorder. And so when you don't have that mucus layer and bacteria come and infect you, you have these ulcers in your large intestine. So next picture, I just wanted to show a little bit of what my work looks like. So any given day, I'm usually here. This is like a sterile hood at the Ross Research Building. And so I'm over there just handling these cells, making sure they're growing. They're actually a pain in the butt to work with because they're so finicky, and I have to cue them right, or else not only am I killing the structure, I'm also killing all the little cells in there. So yeah, but it's really fun to work with. Next picture will show you one of the ways I do my research. So this is actually not a very good image, but each of these are supposed to be enteroids. So your enteroid should never look like this, because right here, I killed them intentionally. I didn't give them growth factor. And so they were dying. And I was saying, yo, if I remove certain factors, can I create the same phenotype I see in my patient sample? And so I killed them successfully. Obviously, they look dead right here, but I wasn't able to create the right phenotype. So that's one thing you'll experience a lot once you do your research is there's going to be a lot of discovery, a lot of failure, and there's things that you discover along the way. So yeah, my research is wet lab, but obviously with COVID, I can't go back. And so right now I'm also doing a literature review. I'm looking at how Wnt signaling works. This Wnt signaling is a way these stem cells develop, and it's really ubiquitous all throughout the body, but for intestinal cells especially, they're really important. And so I hope to just write a good literature review that relates to the research I am working on. And if I ever do go back, I really want to learn how to develop these stem cells from human tissue. So I want to just go back to the med campus, take a patient biopsy, and see if I could actually develop these cell lines from the ground up. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, I'm your man.
All right, thank you, Baruch. And then our next panelist is Ria.
Hi everyone, my name is Ria. I am a junior mole cell major at Hopkins with a minor in Spanish for the professions, and I am a dual recipient of both the Alpine Research Scholarship Award. So that is a subset of the award programs within the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences. So it's a $5,000 award specifically focused on brain science research. Additionally, I am also a summer PURA recipient. So that's under the Hopkins Office of Undergraduate Research, or OUR. And my research is computational, so it's not wet lab, and it focuses primarily on molecular neurogenetics. That's what my lab focuses on. So my lab is actually divided into two parts, both wet and dry. Our wet lab is kind of like Baruch's in the sense that we also use induced pluripotent stem cells to generate brain organoids, and we try to model neuropsychiatric disorders, namely schizophrenia, with said organoids. Our dry lab, which is where I work, is focused more on like the computational analyses of our brain tissues, namely RNA sequencing. So my project focuses on sex differences in schizophrenia. What that means is that within males and females, schizophrenia is really heterogeneous. It presents itself differently. Males have more negative symptoms. They develop schizophrenia earlier than females. So what my project aims to do is to figure out any differentially expressed genes that could be indicative of any underlying molecular mechanisms in schizophrenia. Nia, if you can just like click for the next figure. Yeah, so this is a figure from like the manuscript I'm currently working on. It looks really complicated, but basically all you need to know is that like these little box plots right here in part A just kind of represent like the differences in expression between males and females. And we think that, you know, this might be indicative of like why schizophrenia presents itself differently in males and females. So with COVID, I super lucked out because my research was already on a laptop. I wish I had cool pictures of my lab to show, but I really don't because my lab is basically my laptop. But I super lucked out with COVID. I'm still working on my project, and in the future, I actually am going to be part of the African American Neuroscience Research Initiative at the Lever Institute for Brain Development. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be focusing on racial differences in Alzheimer's disease between Caucasians and African Americans, as there's been a lot of disparities, but no one really has studied why. So that's work that I intend to do in the future. So if anyone has any questions about like, you know, either KSAS programs or our grants, I am more than happy to answer them later, as I've applied for both types of grants.
All right, thank you, Ria. And then our next panelist is Daniela.
Hi, I'm Daniela Asafuje. I'm a senior and I'm majoring in medicine, science, and the humanities and my psychology. And the main research experience I've had that I'll be talking about today is called MCH Learn through, and it stands for Maternal Child Health, Leadership, Education. And you're not familiar with it, kind of like a partner, or they call it like a sister institution with Hopkins. And so like my, this was a paid summer internship. And so that was like my division within it, but there are other like partner programs through the Kennedy Krieger Institute, as well as through other schools that you can apply to. There's Columbia, UCLA, Morehouse, University of Michigan, and collectively those are public health research internships that are funded by the CDC. So I have some pictures here of some of the experiences that were part of my internship. So we went to the CDC last summer for like 5 days, and we presented our research there and like met up with all the other different organizations that were doing research. They also take you to the National Institutes of Health, and you got to do like a not career day, you got to do like a graduate school type of thing and learn about different programs that are available to you. And this picture in the bottom right is a picture of from our Developmental Disabilities Day. So we went to Annapolis and we got to learn about advocacy for those with developmental disabilities. And it was like at the legislature, and you got to talk with representatives to advocate for different things that you believe in. And then the bottom left is a really tiny picture of my project. So the internship is overall just about public health. So if you have any interest in maternal child health or any healthcare type of research in general, this program is for you. My assignment specifically was in the neurophysiology clinic of the Kennedy Krieger Institute, and it focused on limitation of children with autism. And for my project, even though I was based at the Kennedy Krieger Institute, you can be based at the hospital, you can be based at the Baltimore City Department of Health. Like there's various areas that you can be based in. So those are the main aspects of this internship. It's just like obviously a lot of research, just public health learning in general, learning about various health conditions that impact marginalized populations. That was like a really big focus on it. You learn a lot about the social determinants of health, and it has a really big emphasis on leadership, and specifically those who may be underrepresented in the field of medicine, having them become leaders in it as well. And this last picture of me, this was at our annual conference that we go to, AMBER Camp, so stands for the Annual Biomedical Research Conference for Minority Students. Last year we were lucky enough that I was in Anaheim, California, so we kind of skipped part of the program to go to Disneyland, but the internship has like a lot of different opportunities for you. So that's my main thing I'll be talking about today. But in addition to that, I've done research at the Hopkins Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Unit. So if you're interested in psychiatry, I can tell you a little bit about that. And then I also do neonatal research pertaining to brain injury with infants at the Kennedy Krieger Institute and at the Hopkins Hospital. So one position is clinical and the other one is more lab and behavioral research with baby mice. So if you're interested in any of that type of stuff too, I can let you know about that.
All right, thank you, Daniela. And then our next person is Titina.
Oh, hi. So my name is Tahitna, or Titina is the correct way to say it. Niyat is Habasha, so she knows. But I'll start by talking about the beginning of my research journey. So prior to coming to college, I had no experience with research. To be honest, I didn't even really know what it was or the kind of impact it can have. But the first opportunity I came across, I'm also, what's it called? I have a federal work study, so I wanted to be able to like actually earn money. So I was just looking through the job listings and I was like, hey, apply to like work for a cardiology lab? Sure, why not? Like that was just one of the opportunities that stood out to me because I knew I was gonna like, I knew I was interested in science at that point. So it just seemed like why not take a job in something I'm interested in? Two birds, one stone. So I ended up getting accepted for that position, and very similar to Baruch and Ria's work actually, because, well, not Ria's work because you do mostly computational bits, but a lot of the work I had to do as a lab assistant was culture iPSCs. So this was a lab that was run by an MD at the time, and he, as an MD, had the authority to be able to collect patient samples. And so what the lab did was like take those patient blood samples, de-differentiate them into pluripotent stem cells, and then redifferentiate them into cardiac cells and study their behavior, see the physiological outcome of certain mutations, see how they respond to certain things, etc. And one distinction that I want to like put forward is that labs run by MDs are drastically different from labs run by PhDs. So if you are seeking more clinical type stuff, if you want to be working with patient samples, chances are an MD lab is the place to go. So I worked there for about a year, but I wasn't really learning per se because it was mostly a paid position. I was there to do the job that they instructed me to, and it wasn't a particularly like, I don't think the people in that lab particularly cared whether or not I learned. So it was like, I had to do all the like active searching. If I wanted to learn something, I had to like, look places maybe I shouldn't be looking, and ask questions consistently and go to meetings and like take notes at every one of those meetings, et cetera, et cetera. But the lab also ended up getting closed down because the PI was moving to New York. So it just kind of like merged. I didn't have to like, quit or anything. It was like, we're parting ways. Both of us are moving on into different lives. And actually one of the grad students I met when I was working in that lab was like doing her studies under two different labs, the lab that I was at and a different lab run by Dr. Gabelli, shown here on the left, right. And she told me about Dr. Gabelli. So I reached out to her and tried to see like if there was room for me, and fortunately there was. And since then, you guys finding a good mentor the key to having a good experience. So I really enjoy being in that lab, and I've learned so much from there. And in my time working with Sandra, I've applied for and received 2 Pure grants. The first structure here that you see, this is a structural biology lab. I should preface this. So Sandra mostly does work in structural biology, and it's a very like beautiful field. There's not as much, you know, cell culture involved, but it's like trying to crystallize proteins and see what they look like, see what kind of structural modifications occur when you make certain mutations. And this structure here that you're seeing is a NAV channel, which you might have heard of. They're the ones that allow sodium in like cardiac action potentials. You probably see those in like Gen Bio or something. They open up and allow sodium ions in down a gradient. And the first project that I applied with Sandra for a Pure grant for was this project that involved mutating a sodium channel in order to compensate for a mutation that disabled its binding to calmodulin, shown here in magenta. I don't want to get into too much of the detail because I feel like that's not what you're here for, but it was a really cool, pretty project. And if you click next, the next project that I worked on was this project in immunology. And you've probably also heard of them. HLAs, or human leukocyte antigens, they're kind of like the smoke detectors of the immune system. So if something is going on, they'll set the alarm off. Here, shown in the green and the purple, is an HLA structure, and they present peptides to the surface of cells. And as if you're not familiar with cell biology, typically like proteins are regularly degraded, especially if they're dysfunctional or something is detected to have gone wrong. They're degraded, and some of those degraded peptides are presented on the surface of the cell so that T cells can see what's going on inside of the cell and determine whether or not the peptide that is presented is pathogenic or normal, or it's from a foreign substance like a virus or something like that. So this cell needs to be killed or whatever. So here you can't really see the peptide, but somewhere in the middle of this large structure, and here maybe, actually I won't bother annotating, but here in structure C, like a close-up of the peptide that this HLA molecule is presenting. So on top of this is an antibody that mimics a T cell. So the problem, like a major problem in oncology, is being able to detect cancer cells, separate them out from normal cells, right? So T cells are not very good at doing that currently, but if researchers can find ways to improve their affinity for pathogenic mutants and just like exploit that system, that would be really great, because then we can have drugs that target cancer cells but not healthy cells, and so on. So here is an antibody that's mimicking a T cell receptor, but is actually just like we decided what amino acids are going to be there. And so the work I did here before it got cut short by COVID was trying to like improve the affinity that this antibody had for the HLA and the presented peptide. So, and if you click to the next slide, since then, since COVID, I've also been working on a literature review on a different issue, PI through K, because you know 5 years passes and there's so much that gets published, and somehow we gotta keep track of all this information, and yeah, and so that is what I've been working on for the past few months. And yeah, I think I've said all that I wanted to. Thank you for listening. I look forward to answering any questions. I'm glad to have heard what everyone's doing. This is all pretty cool stuff.
All right, thank you. And so I guess now we'll move on to the Q&A. But for the panelists, feel free to answer any of these questions if you haven't answered them. I feel like it was pretty inclusive. You guys already said everything. But yeah, let me stop screen sharing. All right, so feel free to ask any questions you have. Just you can unmute yourself or send something in the chat if that's easier for you. But yeah.
I have a question. So for someone who like has no past research experience, what do you guys think is the best way to like get your foot in the door? Like, do you think the like handshake or just straight up emailing people? Like, what do you think is the best way to start?
So I can give my answer to that. I would say that like it's kind of, I guess, easier if you look at like my breakout groups talking about like the mailing list and also like all the emails that Hopkins sends you. There's like always a bunch of research opportunities. So like, you know, those are PIs who are actually looking for undergrad researchers. Handshake is also a good idea. I don't know if they're going to do it this year with COVID, but there used to be a thing called medical tutorials, and they would, if you sign up, there's like a list of like 100 or like however faculty members who are looking for researchers, and it describes what they do and like what your responsibilities would be, and you can apply it that way easily. But I feel like if you have a specific and you're not really sent out about it, feel free to just like go to the Hopkins Medicine website, look up that division, and like look up those doctors or whoever they could maybe, and you can email them. I've done that to find shadowing, and I found research that way too. Like they're really nice and helpful. And if they're not really like looking for researchers at that time, you could still kind of like get your foot in that way, make connections with them. Maybe they have a peer who's looking for people to take in, or maybe they would be willing to let you shadow them. Probably not anymore because of COVID, but in the past. But yeah.
And I forgot to mention, but we're gonna be sending out the PowerPoint slides, but Kelly actually got some information from the our office about how to find research, and we included that in our slides. So feel free to look at that. It talks about stuff from like how to email, how to like look for awards to support your research, and stuff like that. So feel free to also look at that once we send out our email synopsis of our event today.
I have a question. So like what does your research involvement like within your lab look like after graduation? Like is it just like you cut off all ties, or how does that work?
So I guess like it depends like where you intend to go after graduation. Like say your lab is based in Baltimore and you want to stay in Baltimore, they'll most likely let you continue working with them. Or like if you're moving on to somewhere else, it's kind of like, yeah, you kind of just end it. But like definitely it's not like ending your ties. There's still definitely like good mentors to refer back to, good people to like get letters of rec, and still can keep like a professional relationship with them.
And I did get 2 more questions, but if you guys want to, Titina, were you gonna say something? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and I would just say like, if you really like your lab and you know you're going to be taking a gap year, or if you know you're not going to want to do grad school or anything like that, definitely like see if the lab can afford to, you know, hire you as a research tech, or like if you can enroll in a post-bac program under that PI, because that's like a really like nice way to be able to commit, you know, 40 hours a week to research for however long you want to stay while maintaining that connection and developing the relationships that you've built. So it's like open-ended, but if you really like your lab, then it's probably worth continuing to work there.
All right, and the next question that I got, this is for the Woodrow Wilson Fellow, so Baruch and Marake. What is the application process like for when you apply as a Woodrow Wilson Fellow your freshman year?
From what I remember, I believe you have to submit a proposal about a research interest. So I talked about more generally just like my interest in pancreatic cancer, but it's not rigid. There have been people who've gotten Woodrow Wilson Fellowship under specific proposal and completely changed their project topic. And then I think there is a budget component to it. So just kind of outlining what you expect to spend the $7,500 on, as well as kind of an idea of a mentor if you have one, but also like you're not obligated to have already found a mentor. Baruch, if you want to add anything, this was like a couple years ago, so I don't quite remember all the details.
Yeah, so I would just underscore, just come with a proposal of something you're really interested in, preferably something that's already its own field of study and you're kind of building upon that. I will also underscore the fact that she said it's not rigid at all. I came in trying to study mental health and now I'm doing gastroenterology with enteroids. So obviously things can change. So open these doors. It's up to you to open these doors and apply and get your money.
And leading on to the next question, actually, so about money, so those of you who are like grant recipients, what is the money used for? I think it depends depending on your program, so feel free to answer.
Yeah, for sure. So I think I can speak to that because I have 2 grants from 2 different divisions. So with the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences for the Alpstein grant, you can only use that money for research related expenses. So what that means is that if you are doing research over the summer and you have to pay rent or like food expenses, it can go towards there. If you need a laptop to conduct research, or if you need some new software, you can make those purchases. Or if you are going to attend a conference, obviously not in these times, those expenses are what you can spend that money on. With the Pura, it is a bit different in the sense that you can just get it directly deposited in your account and you can kind of just use that money on like pretty much anything. There's only a specific sanctioned purpose for that money. So I would say those are like the 2 biggest differences in how you can spend money with the our grants and the KSAS grants. And I don't know if I feel anybody else who has gotten an award for KSAS, if your money is spent differently, please feel free to chime in.
Yeah, just to add really quick, especially if you're doing research in a wet lab, more often than not, all of your lab expenses will be funded by the PI themselves. So you don't really need to put up any money in terms of that aspect. And also it really helps because the PI won't have to pay you. So that can help your case in terms of finding a mentor. So for me specifically, I only used my money during the summer on rent, bills, and food, and I didn't have to worry about any other expenses. And I feel like they're also really lenient in terms of like, I was able to get a laptop my first summer because my laptop was pretty crappy. And so if you have any tech related things that you feel like can be a hindrance, if you don't have them, they're also more than likely to provide you that money. Especially, I can only speak on KSAS, but I'm sure like the other programs would also be willing to do that.
All right, feel free to submit more questions. That's all I had in terms of questions that were sent to me. But yes, I can speak to that too. I definitely got my laptop through the Woodrow Wilson Fellowship because my laptop broke my sophomore year, the day before final. That's another story. But yeah, I needed a laptop, so I just used the fellowship for that because it is a research related expense, but at the same time, I did need it for academics. But yeah. Feel free to unmute and ask any questions. I know you guys have questions. Just ask them. It's fine.
And if y'all don't ask, I'm gonna ask Tina about her freaking T cells because she was talking about highly specific T cells. I was like, what? I've never. It's really cool. Your project is really cool.
I actually have a quick comment to make. For those of you who are like kind of postponing research until like things open up again, I would really highly suggest looking at summer programs through the NIH that are funded specifically for students of color and underrepresented minorities, because they have like, I did the NIH Step Up program my summer after my freshman year, and they gave us $5,000 and you could go anywhere you wanted to. You can choose whatever lab you wanted. You weren't restricted in terms of only staying at the NIH. You got to do your own experience, and then everyone would convene at the NIH at the end of the program, and you would do like, there were some workshops in terms of like grad school and medical school, as well as a presentation of your individual research in a like group setting, as well as a poster session. So there was a lot of opportunities for like development there, and it was mostly for people who had never done research before. And so I think that opened a lot of doors for me in terms of what I was really interested in terms of like focusing on my Woodrow project. So if anyone has any questions about that program or any other NIH program, feel free to contact me.
And I also did include email contact information on the slides. But yes, go ahead.
Oh, I was also going to say, if you want to participate in a lab at the Homewood campus, and it's under a department that has a major, I would highly recommend reaching out to upperclassmen in that major or people who have already worked in those labs, because sometimes there are like weird pedagogical rules. Like, I know if you have taken Orgo under Greenberg or whatever, he won't say this like explicitly, but he doesn't publish undergrads. And then there's other professors that will ask you to take particular courses before you're able to participate in research at their labs. So just like, you know, feel it out, reach out to upperclassmen, use them as resources before, you know, get the details.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I remember like my freshman fall, like I was kind of freaking out because I hadn't like, you know, started really looking for research yet. I was so inundated by like classes and extracurriculars, and I already kind of felt like I was behind because it seemed like all my friends were like in a lab. But then like my freshman year suite mate, like, you know, she was working in a lab, but like she went on the weekends and she had to like work like, you know, like pretty much like she was working like full time and she was doing classes, and I knew like, oh my gosh, like that's not the commitment I want, you know, in a lab. I don't think I can give that much time. And so I think what is really important is that you kind of determine like, what do you want out of your lab experience, right? Is your goal to get published? Is your goal to, you know, develop an independent project by yourself? And, you know, if you meet with a PI, like really kind of ask them, like really determine if like that lab will help you support your goals. And I think it will be, that's like a great way to figure out like if you're a good fit for a lab or not. Like, I think this is a little harder to do virtually, but you should try to like, you know, get a feel of like, you know, what the vibe is like in the lab, what like the PI is like, just because like Hidna said, sometimes, you know, if you don't have a supportive PI, it can not work out. And, you know, it's not that it would be like a wasted experience. I think you'd still learn something from it, but the idea is you want to stay with your lab for a while so that you can really get something fruitful out of it.
I do have a question for you guys, because I think this wasn't really mentioned, but what is the order for how, like, do you apply for Woodrow or your other program and then you find a lab, or do you find a lab and then you apply for Woodrow? So like what is like the timeline for how you did things and how it can go for the award that you got?
For me, I was just looking through labs like freshman spring without any intention of applying to Woodrow Wilson. But when I got Woodrow, I just kind of went forward with that lab just because it was easier than finding a completely new lab and starting over. but I know other people have applied to Woodrow Wilson and then found a lab after, and even switched labs while they were like doing projects. So that was my experience.
So,
Go ahead, please.
no, go ahead, because I think, no.
All right. So my situation was kind of weird. I didn't do a project on my Woodrow proposal. So it was kind of the thing where I had my Woodrow and I had like very critical issues with my original proposal that it was not doable. So I had to find a lab with my Woodrow. And let me tell you, it's kind of easy once you have Woodrow to get a lab, because you're coming to this PI and you're like, hey, I have a grant. They want me to do this for multiple years. I can't even necessarily get paid while I'm doing it, but I need a lab position. Can you accommodate? And 9 times out of 10, these people will say, yes, we will accommodate you. So I don't know. Yeah, sometimes just apply for Woodrow and find a lab. That might be a move for you as well.
So for Pura, you do have to, if in the like natural or physical sciences, your project proposal does need to be very much in detail. And so not only do you need a PI, I would argue you need like a good PI who's like willing to work with you in writing somewhat technical stuff. But like you don't need to have like an established relationship with this person, but it just has to be like, I don't know, at least the proposals that I've had success with are the ones that like could be real proposals, not just coming from undergrads, but like from people who are actual researchers. That being said though, that I am like, if you want to apply and you have like a project proposal, like I'm so willing to look through it for you, or like help you in any way. Your PI will need to like help you write it to a certain extent, and you need to apply together.
Yeah, I 100% second Tidna's opinion on like Pura stuff. And so with Pura, at least there are 2 deadlines. One is for the fall, so that's really early. It's like, I think this year was like September 15th. So, you know, if you're thinking of applying for the fall Pura, I would definitely recommend, you know, like you spend like maybe like freshman year summer or at least a summer in your lab, like really getting to work like in depth. And so that way you can have time and the experience to come up with a proposal. The summer Pura deadline is, I believe, like mid-February. So I applied for my grants like last semester. So I was a second semester sophomore. So I applied for the summer Pura grant, which was, I think, like end of January, beginning of February. And I applied for the Alpine grant at the same time. So I started research my freshman intersession. So at that time, I had around a year of experience when I started applying for grants. And I think like that year of experience, it really gave me time to, you know, develop my own project and then like see like where future directions in which I could take it. And I was then able to write like a much more solid supportive throughout the entire process. So, you know, if you're interested in applying for one of those grants, definitely make sure that like, you know, you have the appropriate experience to, you know, write a grant of like that caliber. And like Tidna, if anyone wants, you know, help with those grants, I'm totally willing to look over proposals and, you know, help figure that out. I think also like grants are a little subjective because you will get rated by like 2 random people in like your field of research. I don't know who those like reviewers are. And I would say like the biggest advice I would have about writing grants is to just make sure that like it's very clear and understandable even to someone that might not completely, you know, understand the intricacies of your work. So it's not necessarily like, you know, you're writing to the average layperson, you're still writing within the scientific community, but it has to, you know, I would say like the biggest thing, or at least the biggest challenge I faced when I was writing my grants, at least, is like the clarity of like what the project is about. But again, if you have a great relationship with your mentor, they should definitely be able to help you figure that out.
I have a question. So I just looked at the requirements for applying and it says that you need a letter of recommendation. So how do you go about like reaching out to faculty about getting a letter of recommendation, and what are your tips for doing that with, I guess, like social isolation and all of online learning?
I would say reach out to like professors you have like a better relationship and who know you well, or if you're like the research thing you're applying for is kind of like related to that class, maybe a professor who teaches like that type of subject. And I would say definitely reach out to them pretty early, because I know like professors tend to like take a while to respond sometimes, even if they want to write you a letter of rec. And I would also say like if they like ignore your email, it's most likely they're not ignoring you, they kind of just missed a lot of things going on. So like like a week or two, just be like, hey, just wanted to double check and see, do you have the time? Something to look out for is like a lot of people typically they'll ask you to send them like your resume or to write like a summary about yourself, about your prior experiences. So that's something you can kind of like get ready. So you're not like, it's not thrown at you last minute. It's like another thing for you to do on top of your application. Some professors ask you to like write a draft, which I personally think is really annoying. But at the same time, even if they ask you to write a draft, it's actually like kind of good, because then it's like you got to say like what you want them to say like on your behalf. So those are like some of my tips for it.
Yeah, and I'll just underscore, it's really, really nice if you have your proposal written out that you could send them along with your CV, along with, you know, maybe a personal statement if some of these grants require it. Because, you know, just attaching those 3 files when you ask them for your letter of recommendation, their job is kind of a little bit done already. So I feel like they're more apt if you already have your proposal written out and sent to them, then you ask them your letter of recommendation. So it's a little bit more work since you have to finish your proposal a little bit early, but I think it's worth it if you want a letter of recommendation to be really strong.
I'll add on to that. So I think for me, that's like the hardest, in my opinion, the hardest part of the application. I think though the fact that you guys know that though, like that kind of gives you guys a head start thinking about connecting with your professors like now, going to office hours, and then start thinking about which type of professors are the ones you could ask for letters of rec. If you are a part of a program like Hop-In or Jump, what I did when I applied for Woodrow was I asked one of the Jump advisors to write me a letter of rec. The requirements that it has to be Hopkins faculty for the Woodrow Wilson Fellowship, and I think that's like the tough part about it. So think about like professors that know you well. So most likely that will be classes that are small or classes that you go to office hours often for. And so yeah, just start thinking about that if you are thinking about applying to those type of grants and stuff.
So I'm going to give a perspective that's not, I guess, like Woodrow Wilson centric, because I know you have to apply for the freshman year, but the grants that I applied to, at least I applied to my sophomore spring. So like, you know, around that time, I already had like a year of experience working with my lab. So it was, I think, easier in that sense to ask for a letter of rec, because they kind of knew, they definitely knew who I was. I had already spent a summer working with them as well. And I think it made like the process, I still had to send like, you know, a resume and CV just to like show them, you know, like what other, you know, extracurriculars I was involved with outside of research. But I think, you know, that is one advantage, I think, of applying to grants a little later than freshman year, is just that you get that time to build like a rapport with like your PI and like your postdoc or grad student, whoever your mentor might be.
Something to add on to that, like, again, I didn't do like one of these programs, so I don't know about their specific requirements, but in general, like my letters of recommendation like weren't necessarily like professors. There's like my other research PI, so it's like any other like adult who could really speak to like your skills and like your dedication and things like that. Like obviously like not like a family member, but some type of professional relationship, like maybe someone who supervises your volunteering or something like that. So like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a professor per se, depending on what you're applying to.
Yeah, for sure. Like my PI actually did not write my letter of rec, my postdoc did. And the general, like, I think adage when you are asking for letters of rec is like Daniela said, choose somebody who knows you really well rather than somebody who is like famous or like a big person, like a professor. I think ultimately it really comes down to like what type of interactions have you had with this person, and what particular qualities about this applicant really, you know, stand out to you, and why can you write like a strong recommendation for like, you know, whether it be a research grant or for like any program you might be applying in the future.
Any other questions? Or is there anything else panelists want to add, like suggestions, advice that hasn't been mentioned yet at all?
I guess just one thing I feel like you might have mentioned already was just like, no matter what you're applying to, definitely to like, not that you have to like send your application early, but definitely start early to give yourself like the most time to like submit a competitive application, and to like give yourself enough time to like look at various programs and apply to various things and see what you end up getting.
I would also say this is more so like once you're already in a lab, but just like make sure to advocate for yourself.
Of recognizing, you know, underrepresented minority struggles, and like taking the time to have conversations about issues, not just grads, but like actual researchers down the line, PIs down the line are having. And like, I wish I was part of the biophysics department for this reason, but I'll just like shout them out. It's like a really great community, at least the like, you know, administration, and specifically like the School of Medicine department of biophysics is like very open. They like, over the summer I've attended so many discussion sessions about like what it's like to be a scientist, and like struggles scientists later down the line face, even if you're not interested in like research. Maybe you'll find out like you love it or something. If you're interested in like hearing about those kinds of experiences, like probably asking, you know, different majors how they feel like they've been heard, and how they feel like their identity has been recognized, and like searching for those communities too, because there are a lot of, I mean, obviously the numbers reflect that, but there's a lot of work to be done in order to actually, before we actually get to like a state where academia and science and medicine represent and welcome minorities.
Wait, I think there was a glitch, at least on my end. Maraki, were you talking also?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if my computer, my Wi-Fi is delayed, but I was just gonna say, like, for those of you, like, once you actually enter a lab, just make sure to advocate for yourself, because a lot of times undergrads kind of get overlooked, and just like make sure to prioritize like your own learning more so than the fact that like, you know, you want to save face. So make sure like they're prioritizing the fact that you're there to learn and not necessarily just to do whatever menial task they want you to do. And if you feel like you're not being respected, like just get out as soon as possible. If, especially after you've had conversations with the PI or the postdoc about that, and it's not improving, just like get out and like find a new lab, because there's no point in sticking around if they're not going to respect you. And ultimately you might even end up in a lab where it might even be a different project and you didn't know that you would be interested in. So just, yeah.
I guess like one more thing I'd like to add, definitely like Maraka said, like if the experience isn't good and they're like not being respectful and actually like helping you develop, definitely like don't stick with that. But I also would say like if there's like nothing wrong with a PI and just like it's a new experience and it's kind of like scary and uncomfortable, I'd definitely say still stick with it for like a good duration of time to see if you actually learn to like it. Because like my first research experience was lab research, and I really didn't want to do lab research. Like, I wanted to do clinical research, but like I decided to try it because it was in the field that I wanted to do, which was neonatology. And then like through sticking through it, like I began to really enjoy it. I've been able to like do clinical research through that, and I've been able to like sit in on their meetings in the Hopkins NICU. I've been able to like like I'm technically an employee for them now, like you can really like, I guess just like give something a chance and see if you can actually like grow to like it, or just like your position kind of changes like the longer you're there as well. You get more responsibilities and you can do like more fancy, impressive things. So I'd say just like stick with it for like a good chunk of time if like there's something like actually like horrendous about it.
Yeah, I just wanted to also point out the fact, like, I know we've been talking about like grants and applying for grants. I just wanted to like just give that advice that like a grant is not indicative of like your value as a researcher. And a lot of these grants are really, really competitive. And if it doesn't work out, like it doesn't really define, you know, like the research you have been doing, or like what you could be in the future. So full disclaimer, like I actually applied to like Pura my sophomore fall, and like I didn't get that grant. And I was really upset about it for a little bit because I was like, oh my gosh, like my proposal wasn't good enough. Like, you know, I am not good enough as like a researcher. And that wasn't the case. The like how they do it is that they kind of rate you on like a scale of 1 to 5, and like the cutoff for like, you know, getting like a Pura grant was like 4.5, and I was like at a 4, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was so close, and like I didn't get it, right? So it's just it's really competitive, and you know, they gave some feedback on like what I could do better, and then like I went ahead and they revised and edited it, and then I submitted like, you know, a similar like, you know, version, just like updated with the stuff I did do fall semester in the spring, and then I received it. So, you know, it's really not if you don't get a grant the first time around, like please know you can always like reapply. And there will be like more chances in the future for you to, you know, apply things as you grow and mature, like, you know, along your research path.
Right. So we only have 1 minute left, but feel free to, or just be sure to be on the lookout for this recording if there's anything else that, or if you just have, if there's something you missed from the recording or whatever, or from the meeting, feel free to refer to the recording. But also, we're going to send the PowerPoint slides, which includes like how to find research, like the slides that we went over today, and then also in general, the contact information for the panelists that were here today. So feel free to, or just be sure to be on the lookout for that. And thank you for coming. And thank you for the panelists for volunteering your time to be here.
Thank you for organizing this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Incredible honor to speak here.